It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing bad was supposed to happen, until it did. On the surface, Westridge Lane looked like a postcard. Perfectly trimmed hedges. Identical brick mailboxes. Children riding scooters while golden retrievers chased after them. It was the kind of place where everyone waved, lawns were manicured to the inch, and garage doors lifted at 7 a.m. like clockwork. At the heart of this suburban dream lived David and Claire Bennett, a couple so photogenic they could have starred in a home insurance commercial. He was a 44-year-old financial consultant, known for his spotless record, top clients, and weekend barbecues. She was 38, a serene yoga instructor whose Instagram overflowed with sun salutations, smoothie bowls, and inspirational quotes. They had it all, a 4-bedroom house, a Tesla in the driveway, and a golden retriever named Max. To their neighbors, the Bennetts were not just admired, they were envied. Next door, in a more modest but still tidy home, lived Melissa Klein, a widow raising her only son, Evan. After losing her husband in a highway accident 4 years earlier, Melissa had quietly rebuilt a life for herself. She worked remotely in healthcare administration and rarely left home except for church, errands, or neighborhood potlucks. Evan, now 19, had been away at college but had returned for the summer. His plan was simple: spend time with his mom, work part-time at the community pool, and figure out what came next. What no one knew, what no one even imagined, was how close the lives of these two households were about to entwine. David had once mentored Evan during his high school senior project. Finance and investing. He'd even offered him a summer internship at his firm the year before. Evan looked up to him, called him Mr. Bennett, even after David insisted he just call him Dave. Claire liked Evan too, always polite, always helpful. He had that all-American glow, shaggy blonde hair, an easy smile, and a laugh that made people lean in. Claire would often wave at him from her garden, sometimes toss him a quick comment as he mowed the lawn or took out the trash. But this summer, everything changed. It started one Saturday evening in late June, during a neighborhood cookout. The sky was streaked pink and orange, the air thick with the smell of grilled meat and sunscreen. Claire arrived alone. David had texted that he was tied up at work again. She looked radiant in a white sundress, her hair pulled into a neat braid, gold hoop earrings glinting in the sun. Evan had just come off a long shift at the pool. He smelled faintly of chlorine and sunblock, his polo shirt clinging to him in the heat. When Claire walked up to the lemonade table and caught his eye, something shifted. They talked for almost an hour under the string lights, their voices low, heads tilted slightly inward. Anyone watching would have called it friendly. Familiar. Harmless. But it wasn't. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. Neither could Evan. The texts began the next day. First, a casual thank you. Then, a meme. Then another. Then came the, "You looked nice last night," and the, "I'm glad we talked." Before long, the messages turned flirtatious. Then late night. Then secretive. Claire told herself it was nothing. Just a harmless connection. A summer crush. But deep down, she knew better. Evan knew better too, but he didn't stop. Neither of them did. Over the next few weeks, their glances grew longer. Their conversations deeper. They began taking early morning walks under the excuse of bumping into each other. Claire invited him over when David wasn't home, saying she needed help setting up her new yoga mat rack, adjusting her smart TV, fixing the pool filter. Evan always said yes. One humid afternoon in July, Claire answered the door in a tank top and athletic shorts. Her hair was damp. A bead of sweat ran down her neck. That was the first time it happened. Neither of them spoke afterward. Evan left silently. Claire locked the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily, her hand trembling as it reached for her phone. She didn't call anyone. But it didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, the affair deepened. It wasn't just physical. Claire told Evan about the loneliness in her marriage, how David hadn't touched her in months, how she felt like a ghost in her own home. Evan told her about his confusion, his fear of growing up, his dread of disappointing his late father. They told themselves it was real. That maybe, just maybe, this was love. But it wasn't love. It was a fuse, burning quietly toward the stick of dynamite waiting inside the Bennett home. And all it needed was the wrong moment, for everything to explode. The day everything changed was blistering hot, August 3rd. The kind of heat that made even the air seem heavy. David Bennett had left for work early that morning in his usual pressed shirt and tie. Claire had kissed him on the cheek, the way she always did, and watched from the window as he pulled out of the driveway. Evan had texted her 10 minutes later. "He gone?" She replied with a single word, "Yes." By noon, the house was quiet. Max lay sprawled in a patch of sun on the hardwood floor. Upstairs, the blinds in the master bedroom were drawn against the heat. That's where they met. Claire was nervous, more than usual. Her palms were damp. Evan, shirtless and sunburned from a morning shift at the pool, paced beside the bed. "We shouldn't," he said, "not for the first time." Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "I know. But they did." What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that David's 2 p.m. client had cancelled last minute. Instead of calling, he decided to surprise Claire and take her out for a late lunch. He parked in the driveway, noting that her car was still there. Strange, he'd assumed she had a yoga session. Maybe it got cancelled too. David stepped into the house, the familiar chime of the security system welcoming him. He smiled. The scent of lavender candles drifted from upstairs. Claire's favorite. "Claire," he called. No answer. As he climbed the stairs, he heard a soft thump. Then silence. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. And froze. There, tangled in their white linen sheets, was Claire. And Evan. The seconds that followed stretched like rubber bands about to snap. Claire gasped, scrambling to cover herself. Evan sat up, panic etched across his face. "Mr. Bennett." But David didn't hear him. Or maybe he didn't care. His eyes locked onto the boy he'd once mentored. His wife. Their bed. His hands curled into fists. "No," David whispered. Then louder, "No." Evan stood, trying to speak. "I'm sorry, it's not what you..." David lunged. There was no thought, no pause, no warning. The years of pressure, of distance, of betrayal, real or imagined, all burst to the surface. He reached for the heavy brass bookend on the dresser. A gift from Claire on their 10th anniversary. He never even registered what it was. He just saw red. The first blow landed on Evan's shoulder. The second, on his temple. Claire screamed. Evan collapsed, clutching his head. Blood spattered across the duvet, seeping into the floorboards. Claire pushed David back, yelling for him to stop. David stumbled backward, as if waking from a dream. Evan lay motionless. His chest rose, barely. Claire grabbed her phone with trembling fingers. "I'm calling 911. David didn't stop her. He dropped the bookend. It hit the carpet with a soft thud. When the paramedics arrived minutes later, Evan was still breathing, but barely. His pulse was thready, his breathing shallow. They rushed him to County Memorial. David was silent as the officers cuffed him. Claire sobbed uncontrollably as she admitted everything, the affair, the secrecy, the argument. Her hands were covered in Evan's blood. It didn't matter how perfect things once looked from the outside. The truth had finally kicked in the front door. And now, there was no going back. County Memorial was already bracing for another scorching evening when Evan Klein arrived in critical condition. The trauma team worked fast. A fractured skull. Subdural hematoma. Multiple lacerations. By the time Evan was stabilized, he was in a medically induced coma. The prognosis was uncertain. They told Melissa, his mother, that the next 24 hours would be critical. Melissa had been called by police as soon as Evan's identity was confirmed. She collapsed when she arrived at the hospital and saw her son's face, bruised, pale, lifeless. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She'd seen Claire's car in their driveway too many times. She'd felt something was off. Now her fears had been realized, in the worst way imaginable. Back on Westridge Lane, police cordoned off the Bennett home. Crime scene tape flapped gently in the evening breeze. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering behind trimmed hedges, watching as detectives moved in and out. Detective Alan Moore, lead investigator for the Westridge Police Department, arrived on scene just after 6 p.m. He was calm, methodical, and already familiar with the Bennetts. He'd attended a charity event at their home just 2 months earlier. Inside, the master bedroom was a mess. Blood on the duvet. On the bookend. On the floorboards. Detective Moore took one look at David Bennett, still seated on the living room couch, hands cuffed, eyes vacant, and knew this wasn't a break-in gone wrong. This was personal. Claire, now wrapped in a blanket and seated at the dining room table, was pale, trembling. She gave a full statement without prompting. She admitted the affair. She admitted Evan had been in their home, multiple times. She admitted David hadn't known. Until now. "I never thought he'd hurt him," she whispered. Detectives seized Claire's phone. The text threads told a story on their own, months of escalating intimacy, plans, confessions, declarations. Photos. Voice notes. Enough to prove not just a fling, but an emotional entanglement that had been spiraling. By morning, the story had already broken. Local news outlets ran the headline, "Suburban husband arrested in brutal assault of teen neighbor during alleged affair." The community was stunned. The Bennetts, pillars of the neighborhood. Claire, the calm yoga instructor. David, always the gentleman. And Evan, the sweet, respectful boy who helped shovel driveways in winter and mowed lawns for free. It didn't make sense. But the evidence was undeniable. David Bennett was charged with felony assault and attempted murder. He was denied bail, pending Evan's condition. That condition deteriorated quickly. Just 3 days later, at 2:17 a.m., Evan Klein was pronounced dead. A homicide investigation was officially opened. With Evan Klein's death, everything escalated. The charge against David Bennett was upgraded to second-degree murder, and the case shifted from a suburban scandal to a full-blown criminal trial that would grip the entire state. Media trucks lined the curb of Westridge Lane, their long camera lenses aimed at the Bennett and Klein homes. Reporters clung to fences, asking neighbors for any hint of trouble that might have been overlooked. Everyone had questions. But no one had answers. At the center of it all was a man once praised for his composure. Now, David sat behind bars in county jail, awaiting trial, his spotless life shattered. Gone was the calm professional. In his place sat a hollowed-out man, gaunt and silent. Prosecutors quickly built their case. Their theory was clear: David Bennett had committed a rage killing. Fueled by humiliation, betrayal, and years of emotional distance in his marriage, he lashed out the moment he saw Evan in his bed. They called it voluntary manslaughter at best, premeditated murder at worst. Claire's confession sealed the emotional backdrop. Her phone records were submitted into evidence. Dozens of messages and images were recovered. Prosecutors painted a picture of a growing emotional and physical affair that David had been completely unaware of. But it wasn't just the affair that mattered, it was the moment. the moment David picked up that bookend. His reaction was not one of self-defense, said Assistant District Attorney Emily Cross during a pre-trial press conference. It was vengeance. Swift, violent, and final. Autopsy reports confirmed Evans' injuries, 2 devastating blows to the head, one to the left temple, another across the base of the skull. Either could have been fatal. There were no defensive wounds. No struggle. Evan hadn't fought back. He never even got a chance, Cross said. The evidence was damning. But the defense had their own strategy. David's attorney, Martin Gray, was a seasoned defender in high-profile emotional cases. His argument? Temporary loss of control. A deeply respected man, pushed past his limits by a betrayal so raw it triggered a psychological collapse. This was not a cold-blooded killing, Gray said. This was a man, blindsided, humiliated, and broken, reacting to something no one is ever prepared for. He pushed for involuntary manslaughter, citing extreme emotional disturbance. He hired forensic psychologists who would later testify that David had no history of violence, no predisposition to aggression, and that the affair was a psychological landmine. Meanwhile, Claire remained a controversial figure in the court of public opinion. Some called her a predator, an older woman who took advantage of a grieving young man. Others saw her as a lonely wife clinging to connection. But her guilt was indisputable. She was not on trial, but she was everywhere, on screens, in whispers, in judgmental glances at the yoga studio. Melissa Klein, Evan's mother, issued a quiet but devastating statement. He was my only child. He trusted them. And they destroyed him. The trial was scheduled for early fall. The prosecution was ready. The defense was set. And the entire town braced itself for a courtroom reckoning that would pick apart every lie, secret, and fracture that had been hiding beneath the Bennett's perfect life. The trial of David Bennett opened on a gray October morning in the packed courtroom of Westchester County Superior Court. The air buzzed with tension. Every seat was filled, neighbors, reporters, family, strangers. Everyone wanted to witness how a man so admired could fall so far. David entered the courtroom in a navy suit, thinner than most remembered, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. Claire sat in the second row, behind the prosecution's table. Her face was pale, her posture rigid. Melissa Klein, dressed in all black, clutched a framed photo of her son. Judge Pamela Rourke presided. Known for her cool demeanor and sharp intellect, she warned both sides, this courtroom will not be a theater. The facts will speak for themselves. And then it began. The prosecution opened strong. Assistant District Attorney Emily Cross laid out a timeline built on digital evidence, eyewitness accounts, and forensic analysis. She showed the jury photos of the blood-soaked bookend. She showed Claire's texts, the flirtation, the planning, the secret meetings. She replayed the 911 call, where Claire, crying, had screamed, "He's not breathing, oh my God, I think he killed him." Then came the medical examiner's testimony, 2 deliberate strikes, not wild or panicked. Controlled, he said. Targeted. Not a flailing act of rage, an intentional act of force. Next came Melissa Klein. Her testimony was short but crushing. I trusted them. Claire. David. They treated Evan like family. I thought he was safe. I thought they were good people. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. Her strength filled the courtroom with silence. Then the defense rose. Martin Gray didn't deny what happened. But he reframed it. David Bennett is not a monster. He is a man who walked into the most intimate betrayal imaginable, he said. He found his wife of 15 years in their marital bed, with the young man he'd mentored. He called it a psychological explosion. A moment when logic and restraint gave way to human reaction. Then came the psychological expert, Dr. Caroline Brooks, a specialist in trauma and behavioral triggers. She explained how the combination of betrayal, humiliation, and emotional repression could cause a temporary break from conscious control. A phenomenon known in psychology as acute stress response dissociation. She pointed to David's clean record, his peaceful temperament, his community involvement. This wasn't premeditated. It was primal. Claire took the stand next. The courtroom held its breath. She admitted the affair, quietly, clearly. She said Evan had pursued her, but she hadn't resisted. She said she never meant to hurt anyone. "I never imagined it would end like this," she said. When asked if David had ever shown signs of aggression before, she shook her head. "Never," she whispered. Cross pressed her, "Then how do you explain what he did?" Claire looked down. "Because I broke him," she said. As the trial entered its final stretch, the weight of every testimony, every photograph, and every transcript hung heavy in the room. 12 jurors sat in silence, their faces etched with fatigue. For 2 weeks, they had watched a man's life be dissected and a teenager's future be mourned. Closing arguments began on a rainy Thursday. Prosecutor Emily Cross stood before the jury with a calm but piercing gaze. Her voice was steady, precise. Yes, David Bennett was betrayed. Yes, he was humiliated. But betrayal does not justify murder. She reminded them of the evidence, the weapon, the deliberate blows, the lack of hesitation. She reminded them that Evan Klein had no weapon. No warning. No chance. He was 19. Barely a man. David Bennett didn't lose control, he made a choice. A permanent one. And Evan Klein paid for it with his life. Then Martin Gray rose. His tone was softer, almost mournful. "No one walks out of this courtroom unscathed," he said. "A young man is dead. A mother grieves. A marriage is destroyed. But this case isn't about revenge, it's about responsibility." He repeated that David Bennett had no history of violence. That he was pushed past the edge of rational thought in a moment of overwhelming emotional collapse. "It was not cold-blooded murder," Gray said. "It was a moment. A devastating, human moment." When the jury was sent to deliberate, the courtroom emptied into the humid courthouse halls, a low hum of speculation following every step. They deliberated for 3 days. Each morning, Melissa Klein arrived first, sitting quietly with her sister beside her. Claire came each day too, always alone. David remained behind the defense table, motionless. On the 4th day, just after noon, the foreperson passed the note to the bailiff. "We have a verdict." The courtroom filled within minutes. David stood. Claire bowed her head. Melissa gripped her son's photo tighter. Judge Rourke entered and asked the jury to read their decision. The foreperson stood, eyes steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, David Bennett, guilty of second-degree murder." A gasp rose from the gallery. Claire stifled a sob. David did not react. Judge Rourke addressed the court. "Mr. Bennett, this court recognizes the complexity of human emotion. But it also recognizes the weight of consequence." She sentenced him to 28 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18. No applause. No cries. Just silence. As David was led away, he paused, not to look at Claire, not to acknowledge Melissa, but to glance once, briefly, at the spot where Evan's photo had sat on the prosecution's table. And then he was gone. In the weeks after the verdict, Westridge Lane was no longer the same. Gone were the sunny greetings and lawn-chair conversations. The Bennetts' once pristine home sat dark and still. The blinds stayed drawn. The Tesla was towed. The flower beds withered in the fall chill. Claire filed for divorce quietly, days after the sentencing. She moved into a small apartment across town, closer to the yoga studio where she no longer taught, but still showed up to sit in the back of classes she once led. She kept to herself. Grocery shopping late at night. No more social media. No more neighborhood walks. Just long hours of silence in a space that echoed with too many memories. Neighbors whispered, but few dared approach. Some blamed her. Others pitied her. Most just kept their distance. Meanwhile, Melissa Klein buried her son in a simple ceremony at St. Augustine's Chapel. Evan's former classmates carried his casket, boys who used to swim laps with him, who played backyard football just last summer. Melissa gave no eulogy. She simply stood at the grave, her hand on the casket, lips pressed to keep from crying. She didn't need words. Her silence said everything. In the months that followed, she left her job and began volunteering at a youth shelter in a nearby city. She never gave interviews. Never appeared on camera. She didn't want attention, she wanted peace. Or the closest thing to it. David Bennett was transferred to a medium-security facility upstate. In prison, he kept to himself. He declined interviews and rarely accepted visitors. His attorney released a short statement on his behalf. Mr. Bennett remains remorseful. He wishes above all that he had walked away. But remorse didn't bring Evan back. And it didn't heal the neighborhood. Homeowners on Westridge Lane stopped holding summer block parties. Children were no longer allowed to play unsupervised. The house next to the Bennetts went up for sale within weeks. The buyer never knew what had happened next door. Eventually, new families moved in. Lawns were trimmed again. Holidays came and went. But those who had lived through that summer never forgot. The case remained the subject of podcasts, local news specials, and online forums debating everything: Claire's role, David's sentence, whether it was murder or madness. But for those closest to it, the truth wasn't found in headlines or hashtags. It lived in quiet grief. In shattered trust. In the echo of lives that would never return to what they once were. In the end, the tragedy of Evan Klein wasn't just the violence that ended his life. It was everything that led up to it: the secrets, the longing, the loneliness that lingered behind suburban smiles. The lie of perfection. The slow, quiet fracture that went unnoticed until it broke in full view. David Bennett was not a monster. He was a man who built a life on discipline and structure, only to watch it unravel in seconds he could never take back. Claire Bennett was not a villain. She was a woman who found herself drifting in a quiet, passionless existence and clung to something she mistook for meaning, only to see it become something she could never control. And Evan. Evan was a teenager. Bright. Earnest. Full of potential. He didn't see the trap until it closed around him. He didn't deserve the weight he carried, or the violence he met at the end. His death left a mother hollow. A community shaken. A courtroom stunned. There were no winners in this story. Only wounds. Only lessons whispered in kitchens and remembered in silence. Westridge Lane is quiet again now. A new couple lives in the Bennett house. Their children ride bikes on the same pavement where Evan once walked. They smile, unaware of the shadow history leaves behind. But for those who remember, the sound of sirens still rings. The weight of silence still lingers. And the name Evan Klein remains etched in the hearts of everyone who watched a summer of secrets explode into tragedy. Because sometimes, it's not the stranger in the dark. It's the people next door.